Catus, Maximus here, this time with a quick little review of this 1/4 inch dry flex round head BlackHawk Ratchet. This happens to be, I believe, a GW 9997. So this is a New Britain design, which is a pretty good design. Recognize that. It doesn't give you the patent number, but it does say patented, and you always kind of recognize it from this design. Surprisingly enough, I have reviewed a lot and have a lot of New Britain built ratchets under various names. They've all worked perfectly except for one 3/8, which also happened to be a BlackHawk. And that's how this one ended up getting donated. Is the problem is they have some, I'll show you inside, but they have some issues where once they start getting a little bit gummed up, they start to want to slip. And then when they start slipping a little bit, a lot of people just continue to use them, and it ends up grinding out the teeth and the head. They can be a very reliable and super long-lasting mechanism, but they do have to be kept clean. So I'm going to see if I can't bring this one back to life a little bit. We know this ratchet's seen some days. The spring for the swivel head is totally gone. You can see it's sat around toolboxes so long that it's worn through the plating. So let's get this little ring out of here. If I can find the start. Always exciting trying to find the start of these little spiral rings here. And we'll go ahead and get this thing apart. There's a lot of crud. Sometimes with these difficult ones you really need to use just a O-ring pick that's nice and sharp so you can actually get the darn spiral retention or the spiral ring in there. This one really doesn't want to come out. When that happens, you kind of lift up and you actually pull on it to unwrap it. And it's definitely pretty clogged up in there. Oh yeah, super, just totally clogged up. Wow. Look at that thing. The pawl is totally filled with grit. Okay, I spent a minute here. And those were actually initially I thought it was totally stripped out, but after scraping I can see that there actually are some teeth left inside there. So I'm going to spend a minute trying to scrape all this out, see if we can't get it to come back to life. Otherwise, it would be these are great ratchets, except for the spring nut can wear out here. And then once again, that they have to be maintained. Surprising how much crud can come out of a 1/4 inch ratchet. It looks like we may actually have been successful after spending a bunch of time. You can actually see that the teeth weren't rounded out. They were just filled with hardened grease and rust. After spending a great deal of time trying to clean this thing up, it's always a bear to put them back together, so I hate taking out that C-clip and trying to get its special little spring in there. But after cleaning this up, managed to get the pawl wanting to cooperate now. So I guess we get to see if we actually got the thing working. Oh, it's ratcheting now. Very smooth. See if it works in the other direction. So this is just with my fingers. I'll have to do some load testing to see if it wants to actually slip under load, but it's actually operating now. And so that's all it takes, at least in this case, to get this ratchet back in order. Just a lot of time cleaning it and using a really sharp pick to scrape out the teeth. Seem to be going good. I actually have one of these special 4-point sockets in 1/4 inch. And actually using this, it really does seem to be pretty good. And taking that apart, you can see how big the pawl was. That's what makes the New Britain design so nice, is the fact that it has a wedge type pawl, kind of similar to how fine-tooth pearhead ratchets work, but it's in a round head. And of course the pawl is extremely wide. And got this one back in order. I'm actually pretty happy about it. One thing to mention is this is a slightly older style. What I mean by that is you can see on this one where they have this kind of machine shelf here, and by the more rounded head. See, this Mac was also made by New Britain. It's an old Mac, but it's a bit newer than this, and you can see this Mac has much straighter walls, and it doesn't have that shelf on the anvil, so I was able to put a shim washer and a snap ring in there to make the anvil on this perfectly tight. The anvil on this works pretty well, but is a bit loose, and that's always been probably the biggest Achilles heel of the New Britain design, is for some reason they always have loose anvils. It's probably because their pawl, the way it floats, is such a reliable mechanism that they just decided, it works just fine, and then they can save a bunch of money not having to have perfect tolerances between or for the machining of the head, at least that depth. The more difficult thing is going to try to get this pin out, and actually really looking at this, you can see where the weakness is. These forks are actually pretty thin, and then the criticism of using a through pin, this pin is actually press fit into the head and floats in the fork, is both you have thin forks, but then the more modern ones use screws. That way it helps prevent the forks from wanting to spread apart. In this case, you actually have a pretty thin cross section of metal here. I'm sure that this fork would either splay and the pin would slip, or that they would just straight break. The eyes would just straight break before you ever broke the anvil on this. So that's probably the one unfortunate thing, is it's not going to be as strong as some more modern stuff. Surprisingly enough, that wasn't in there quite as tight as I thought it was. Just some judicious use with a hammer and a nice 3/16. I do recommend having high quality drive pin punches. These Starrett ones are actually reasonably well priced for how nice they are. Get some of that oil off here. And in case you're wondering how they do this, as you can see that there are these marks in this pin where they've essentially taken a chisel and hammered it into it to expand the metal a little bit. And then the hole in the head itself has been reamed at a very precise size. And we can see it does use a spring, and that spring is just worn out. Let's see if I can't dig up another one here. So the spring they were using was actually just a split washer. That's all it was. I couldn't find the one exactly the right size, so I just re-split it and then bent it in a couple different ways, and then struggled to get the handle back off. But now this works pretty well. And so that was worth it. I actually paid $3 for this ratchet. It's a little bit of an effort, and of course a little video to make with you all. And you can take a ratchet that doesn't work and has a floppy head, and all of a sudden now it's just fine. A nice amount of friction in the head, and turns out it wasn't stripped out at all. It works just fine. I've been doing quite a bit of torque testing on it, and it hasn't slipped at all. And that's another reason why you really want to use a light lube. I've really learned my lesson. I used to use grease, and in some of my early ratchet videos I did greasing, and people said, you know, you should always use light lube, mainly because it doesn't want to capture and then trap. One, grease ends up getting hard by itself, and then secondly, the tackiness of grease makes it want to trap grit, and then it builds up, gets hard, and does exactly this. So anyway, if you run into one of these old BlackHawk ratchets that kind of has one of these distinctive reverse levers, you also know, because really fine tooth. This is not like a 20 or a 36 tooth. These are like 60 tooth. Nice old fine tooth flex head ratchet. And so anyway, I really appreciate everybody watching this video and going on this little restoration journey with me. I actually had somebody comment about saying they had one of these BlackHawks, and so I was pretty stoked to have found this one, and even more stoked that I was able to get it back in order. Anyway, I really appreciate everybody who's been watching and subscribing, and if you haven't subscribed, please do. Until next time, Catus Maximus.